Today on the shop we're going to be doing an overhaul of this Tuff Torq K46 Series transaxle. So we've got this gearbox for a lawnmower which the previous owner said was not working, and what we would like to do is test it and then do a strip down to see what exactly is wrong with it. But while it was standing here in this drip pan, we noticed all of this oil leaking out of it. Alright, so the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to remove this full plug here, and the best way to do it is to put a screwdriver underneath it, and you just bump the screwdriver until the plug comes loose. Once the plug's out, inside here is this little magnet. You want to check this magnet to see if it's got any thick metallic objects on. Fine metal like this is acceptable. What you're looking for is any chunks, and I don't see any chunks on this, so that's a good sign so far. Alright, the next thing we've got to do is empty out any oil that might be in here. So we're just going to flip this upside down and let the oil drain out. You can see the oil coming out there. Alright, now that we've drained all the oil out of the gear case, what we're going to do is we're going to remove all of these bolts over here. There are only two long bolts, which are these two. All the rest of these bolts are all the same size. So we're going to go ahead and remove all of these bolts. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to use these little pry points that are all the way around this case to gently lift up the case. So you're going to stick a screwdriver underneath there, and all you want to do is just break the seal. So you can see there the case is just starting to move. We'll move to the next pry point and we'll just break the seal on the case. Alright, so you can see now we've pried all of these pry points, and this case is now loose, so we should be able to just gently lift this case up and off the back of the gearbox. There we go, there's the case. And over here is the oil filter, so we'll pop that out. And you can see there's a lot of junk, metallic junk inside of that oil filter. Alright, so we had a good look at this cover, and what we see right there is that there is a nick or a gash inside of this cover. And if we flip this cover over and look inside there, you can see that this cover is cracked all the way through. So what I suspect happened is some debris while the mower was operational flew up and cracked this cover, and that caused the oil leak. And once the oil all leaked out, this gearbox could no longer run, because this gearbox seems to be in a very good condition. I don't see any major damage or large chunks on any of these magnets, so I don't think this gearbox is damaged. I think we've had an oil leak through this gash over here. So I'm going to go ahead and repair this cover, and then we'll put this gearbox back together again. Alright, so we at least need to remove these magnets over here to clean them out. This is an improvement that has been done on this gearbox here to hold these magnets into place, which keeps the oil clean that's going into the pump. So I need to check these magnets. So what I've decided to do is at least remove all three of these screws and take out the center body here. That way we can inspect the pump that sits inside of here and the motor that sits inside of here. So we're going to go ahead and remove that. The other reason why we want to remove this is that we need to scrape all of this gasket off the flanges here. So we're going to go ahead and remove the motor and the pump, as well as these magnets, so we can get them clean. We've removed the bolts now, so we're ready to take this out. So a couple of things just to note. We need to make sure of small parts like this little block that's inside of here. This block is rounded at the back end there, so it comes out in that direction. It can't be turned 90 degrees because it doesn't fit back in at 90 degrees, so we're sure that this block comes back in this way. The other important thing to note is the orientation of this block over here. It's a wedge shape, so you can see this narrow side is at the top with the flat face facing towards the brake, this here being the brake. So just want to make sure that we got all of these parts in the right order before we start lifting them out. We're going to remove this intermediate gear here, and you'll note when it comes out that the shaft has a flat side on it over there. That flat side must be up for the case. It's got a washer on this side, a washer on that side, a spacer, and then it presses off. And note these two rings on the inside face towards the inside of the gearbox. So the two rings towards the inside. What we're going to do is we're just going to slowly lift it out of its position over there. Alright, so you'll see over here we've got the brake and the drive gear. Take that out. Got to be really careful of these two little valves over here, so let's just hold them into place there. And you've got the rest of the assembly here. We're just going to gently pull the shaft out. Now, note that you've got a bearing and two washers there, so we're going to keep that together as a unit for now. You've got the motor over here, and I don't know if you noticed that there's a washer that just fell out from the motor. So let's grab the washer. Very importantly, right down here at the bottom is this little teeny tiny pin. This pin pops into that hole, and if you let it go, it goes all the way through and pops out at the bottom again. So if we pop the pin in there, it's going to go all the way through and drop out at the bottom. There's the pin. Okay. Then over here, oops. Over here we have the actual pump itself with all of its little pins. Right, and at the bottom of the pump there you can see is another bearing over there. Right, over here we've got the little parts for the brake. There's that little block over there, and then this block on this side here. L-shaped block, fits in that way, and you can see there's just a fraction of wear on that brake. Alright, so for us to clean this case, I want to just take out the center differential. To do that, you lift this metal spacer out, and then you slide the axle back and remove this little clip. Sometimes a magnet helps to get that clip out. Now you can slide out the axle shaft on this side. We're going to do the same on that on the other side. And you lift out the plate and then use the magnet to lift out the clip. Right, with that out the way, we can slide out the axle shaft and remove the differential and the gear. Now, just take note of which way it came out. Last thing we're going to do is just slide out these axle shafts and remove these spacers. So again, look, they have a oblong shape, so they slide in like that. They can't go in that way. So we're going to just remove that one and this one over here, and we'll gently just slide the shaft out the housing. Be careful as you slide out at the end that you don't damage the little seal. We're going to replace these seals, so not too worried about the seals. Right, so there's the gearbox disassembled.
We proceeded to remove all of the brackets bolted to the outside of the case. We continued to punch out the roll pins that held the control levers in place, and then removed all of the remaining shafts and seals from the case.
Alright, so we've now fully removed all the components that we need to from this casing. All the internals are out. We've removed all the seals. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take our wire brush and our scraper, and we're going to go ahead here and start scraping all the old gaskets off these faces. We'll use the wire brush and we'll polish this up. Once that's clean, we're going to stick this into the parts washer and give this a good wash. Alright, so what we want to do now is wash these two casings. So we put them here in our parts washer. We've added some degreaser into this, and then we're going to wash this now in high temperature. Once we're done, we'll do a little bit of extra work on this one there where we need to weld. So let's go. normal wash at high temperature and start. Off we go. So the next thing that I'm going to have to do is repair this crack over here. I'll be able to clean this out, and I think I'll be able to get in here with a TIG welder to weld this and repair this crack. But from the inside, don't think I'm going to get my TIG welder deep enough inside of there to repair this whole crack. I might be able to do a little bit over here, but I certainly won't be able to go all the way in. So this repair is going to have to be done mainly from the outside. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to clean this out over here, and once it's clean we'll TIG weld that up. So one thing I do want to point out is I am not a TIG welding expert, especially not on aluminum. I can hold my own, but if you are a TIG welder, please don't hold it against me. Right, so the first thing we have to do before we weld is to clean this area. What I'm actually going to use is a little burr, and then I'm going to grind out so that there's no dirt in this area. Okay, so that's nice and clean in that area. We're still going to go ahead and just clean up anywhere nearby that, and then we'll use some acetone before we weld. Right, so we've repaired this case. It's not the best repair ever, but it certainly is functional, and I don't think it will be leaking. And on the inside, we were able to keep it narrowed down, so fairly decent repair. Not the best, but it will work. Alright, so what we're going to do to try and clean these drive shafts up is we're going to take them and put them in the lathe, and then we're going to take a piece of very fine sandpaper that we have put oil onto it, and we're going to hone these surfaces. Right, so we've got our second shaft in here now. Chuck is nice and tight. So we're going to go ahead and hone this second one. You'll note I'm being very careful over the seal area.
We also washed and cleaned all the small parts that came out of the case.
Alright, so what we have here is a new seal kit. We bought this from Tuff Torq. It's got the breather, it's got the filler plug and its magnet, and then all the different seals. Those are the wheel end seals. It's got a new filter and then sealant. So we're going to go ahead and install all the seals, and then we will finish up with the filter and the seal kit. Be very careful when you do get this. Over here are two little small filters that go inside of the valves. They're very easy to lose these, so look after those. We have the case here now back from the parts washer. So what we're going to do now is reassemble, and we're just going to do it in the exact opposite order of what we took it apart. So first thing that goes back in is this. We have some of the oil that we're going to use to fill up over here, and we're going to use that to lubricate and coat as we start reassembly. Right, so to reassemble everything, we're going to use just a squirt of oil on the shafts. That just helps lubricate as we're reinstalling, and we're going to just slide this through over here. Important to note inside here that these two legs of the spring need to go over this pin, so we just make sure that that's assembled correctly. Okay, great. Alright, so this is the seal that fits over here. Seals have an inside or an outside, so there's a lip with a small spring. So we know that this needs to go inside, so we're just going to again use some oil to lubricate it, some lubrication on the shaft, and just carefully slide this over the shaft, and then we'll just press it into place in the housing. Now these seals need to sit sub flush, so what we'll do is we'll actually just get a little socket and just push this in with a socket. Alright, so the seal is in and it's sitting sub flush, so we know that that's good. We can now go ahead and connect this arm that we removed back on there again. Right, so the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to take this spring pin, and we're going to put the spring pin back through the hole that we took it out of. Right, so we've got the first roll pin installed over there. There is a secondary roll pin now that we're going to slide through that primary roll pin. Next thing we're going to reinstall is this main input shaft. We've cleaned it and dried it. Once the shaft is in, there is this circlip that needs to be reinstalled, and then after that we'll pop the seal back in from the top. Next thing we're going to reinstall are the two O-rings that come around this brake shaft. So we have the O-rings there. Very important that when we install the spring, we've got to remember there is a little pin over there. These two arms need to be pulled to each side of the pin, so this one needs to be stretched over to that side, and then we've checked the arm comes back on this way, so we'll put the roll pin in there and secure that. And the next thing I'm going to reinstall is this arm. So they're the two O-ring seals that need to go in onto that shaft. Make sure when you put the shaft in, I had to go back and look at the videos to see which orientation it was that it came out, that it's in the correct orientation. This works on that little pin to bypass and dump your hydraulic oil if you need to freewheel the unit. So make sure you get this orientation correct. Make sure that the hole is lined up and that the arm is in the correct position. So let me go ahead and reinstall this. The last two seals we're going to install are the two drive shaft seals. So one goes in on this side and the other one goes in on this side. Now these seals will seem to go in almost the wrong way around. If you look, the little spring is on the inside on this side, so the open end of the seal is going to go to the outside. It has an extra dust lip on this side, so if you are putting these in, just make sure you get them the right way around. The spring goes to the inside. Alright, the next thing we're going to reinstall is this control block and the wear liners over here. This is the washer that goes into the control block. You'll notice that it's slightly different from the washer that sits on the other side that touches the pistons. There's a slight thickness difference between these two. If you look over there, a slight thickness difference, so the thinner washer goes into the block, the thicker washer goes against the piston. If you look very, very carefully, you'll also notice that this one has got a slightly larger inner diameter than the other one. So the larger inner diameter goes with the block, the smaller inner diameter goes with the bearing. One thing to note, if you're putting these spacers back in or if they slide out accidentally, right at the bottom there's a little pin. So you'll see there's a hole on the spacer and they are free to slide around until they touch that pin, and once they slip on that pin, they're actually nice and tight inside of there. So make sure if these come out accidentally or you remove them on purpose, that you seat them on their pin inside of there. We're going to lube all of this up and reinstall all of these components. The next thing we're going to install are the two axle shafts. They come together with these clips. Don't forget the bearings that go over here on the inside, and then it all holds together with this main gear and differential that goes together. So we're going to clean all of this and then reinstall that. So we've got the side shafts in here in the bearings and ready to go there. Just something to note that this gear has got a flat side and a recessed side over here. So the recessed side, this side, is going to go to the short shaft. So when we put this in, we're going to install that this way around. We're going to slide our shafts in there to hold this whole thing together. Right, get that shaft in. Alright, so next thing we're going to reassemble is this intermediate gear. I have made sure to use some lubrication on there so that these things all slide very well. One thing to remember when we install this gear is that this little flat section of the shaft needs to be pointing upward like that. If you don't have it upward, if you put it in that way around, when you put the two halves of the case together, this is going to actually crack the other half of the case. So remember that that shaft has to go that way around. And when we remove this gear, we made sure that this gear had these double indents facing inward. So this goes back together like that with the two thrust washers on each side. go, intermediate gear is installed. Right, the next thing we're going to install is the bearing and top washer that goes in over there, so that we are ready to install the pump. Alright, so next thing we're going to install is the pump. So the first thing that goes on there is that little spring, and then what we're going to do is we're going to tilt the case up so that these pistons don't fall out as we gently slide that onto the shaft. So we now have the shaft connected with the motor over there. Right, next thing we have to do is we've got to remove these two little pistons over here. And if you look at each one, they've got a spring, and at the end of each spring they've got a little filter which sometimes gets stuck inside of there. So I'm going to go and get that little filter out there, and the filter out of this one over here. Both little filters are stuck inside there. So I'm going to quickly pull these two little filters out and show you the filters, and those filters need to be replaced. Alright, so there are those two tiny little filters that we just removed, and in our seal kit we got two new filters, so we're going to just replace those two filters, slide them inside of there, and then we'll just discard these old filters. Alright, so I'm really worried about these little valves falling out while we're busy assembling. So what I'm going to do is take some of this transmission assembly lubricant, and I'm actually going to use it to keep these valves into position. Usually once you put it in, they're less likely to slide out. So I'm going to just smear a little bit of this onto here, and that will just help keep all of this together as I reassemble it. Same with this little pin here. I'm also going to use just a little bit of lubricant on there to make sure that this little pin does not fall out while we're assembling this block. So I'm going to leave the pin sticking out slightly. You can see that the pin is in there, just sticking out slightly, with some lubricant on it, some assembly lubricant to keep it from falling out. Right, so the next thing that we need to reassemble is this main block with all of its components. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to build this together so that we can slide it all in as we need to. So we're going to take all of these components and start sliding it through. So the first thing that comes through is the shaft that has to go through there. Then we'll put this gear and the brake on that side, and then we're going to stack the piston pump motor on this side like that, and then we're going to take our valve block, and don't forget about this washer that needs to go in over there, thrust washer, because it's a thrust washer. You just want to make sure there's some oil on it, and as well as the bearing that's inside of there, that's oiled up when it starts up. So I'm going to take this valve block, I'll keep my fingers on the two valves over there. I'm going to make sure a little pin is still sticking out over here, and then what we're going to do is we're going to slide this whole lot together like that. And once we've got it in our hands, we're going to now slide this whole thing into here. Now this is rather tricky. You'll remember that this block came out on ours here with a thin side to the top. Sometimes this valve block is mounted the other way around with a thick side to the top, so you need to know which way it came out. And what we have to do now is we've got to try and squeeze this whole lot together and then push it down and onto its pins over there. So this is a rather tricky thing to get right. It might take us a few times to do it, but here we go. Right, so what we've got now is we've got this block and bearing into position. Now what we need to do is we need to press and compress all of these springs inside of this piston pump. There we go. Alright, so we'll check that we've got our two little valves inside over there, so we know that they didn't fall out. This is in position, it's the right way around, and our bearing is in position, so we can just press this down, and there we go. It's all in position now. Alright, so now that we've got this valve block on there, we can put the dual magnet back in its place, and then we can put these M10 bolts in each one of the bolt locations. There. Then I'll just run them down with this. I'm not going to impact with them, I'm just going to run the bolts down. Okay, with those in place, the book says that this needs to be torqued to between 33 and 47 foot-pounds. So the middle of 33 and 47 is 40 foot-pounds. So I have set my torque wrench over here to 40 foot-pounds, and so we're going to just slowly start tightening these up until we can click them off at 40 foot-pounds. Alright, all torqued off to 40 foot-pounds. So next thing we're going to put in are these little brakes. So remember, the L block goes in this way around, so we'll put a bit of oil on it. There. And then this one comes in there. And then we'll put this plastic spacer in, like that. And again, we'll just put a little bit of lubricant on it to hold it into place. Good. Don't forget to put this magnet back in over there, and then the last thing to put into place here is our filter, and the cover that we put on will hold that filter into place. Before we put the cover on, we need to put this gasket maker onto it, so we'll just smear a thin bead of this all the way around the edge of this case, and cut the tip off there. Discard that, and so now we're just going to make a little thin bead all the way around this edge here, like going around each hole, and then just providing a bead. You don't want it too thick, because then it's going to make little slivers that go inside of the gearbox. You need to have just enough to provide seal. So this case is quite interesting because it is divided into two halves, so you also need to add a line of gasket maker all the way around the split line that goes over there. So we've now got our gasket maker spread on this case. We can now flip this over and then put this in to hold this whole lot into place. Great. Next thing we're going to do is to install all the bolts into this case. Now, a tip here is just to start them with your fingers to make sure that they're engaged properly in their threads. If you start them with a impact or a driver, what could happen is that they could cross thread. So we're just going to make sure they all turn freely by hand, and then we'll use the driver just to save some time and push them all the way down. We're not going to tighten them with the impact because they all need to be torqued. Okay, now that we've snugged all of these bolts down, we're going to take our torque wrench. Our target torque is between 16 and 18 foot-pounds. So we've set this torque wrench to 17 foot-pounds, and we're going to go more or less in a crisscross pattern here and torque these bolts down. So it's easy to forget this little C-clip or E-clip. We're just going to make sure we don't forget it by just sliding it back onto the shaft. And this can be quite tricky to get it on sometimes, so usually a pliers works best to just push it back onto the shaft. There we go. So when we were removing the old breather, we actually damaged it. Fortunately, in the seal kit there is a new breather, so we're just going to push that into place there. And that's just allowing air to escape from the gearbox as it heats up. We need to reinstall all the brackets that we removed. Again, just making sure that we don't cross thread these bolts as we get them installed. So make sure we can turn them in by hand before we use any power tools. So we've allowed the gasket to dry for a little bit. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to fill up with oil, and there is a certain amount that it needs to be away from the top, so we're just going to fill this all up. Alright, so we've filled the transaxle up with oil. Both chambers are full, so what we're going to do now is engage the gear, and then we'll use this drill to spin it, and what we should see is these output shafts rotating. There we go. And there you can see the output shaft rotating. So we know that this transaxle is now working properly. Now that we've tested this transaxle, we know it's working and all the air is out. We're going to do a final top up of the oil level to within the spec given in the book. And with this topped off, we are going to insert the magnet that goes into here. Make sure it's clean. So the magnet goes into there, and then finally the new cap that comes on there, and we'll just press this cap into place with a tap. There we go. All done. The final assembly is to just slide on the nut, the pulley and the fan, and then we will put the circlip back in again. Once the circlip is on, what I do is I just rotate it to make sure that it's seated properly in the groove and that it doesn't come off again. And there we are, assembled. We're going to now put this back into the lawnmower and take it for a drive.